Hi, everybody. Hi, friends. Just taking you in on my screen. Good to see you, those that I can see. Conscious there's people joining in all sorts of ways and really welcoming all of you and all of each of you into this space. Yeah, it's good to be here. I would like to talk today about silence. Sometimes I don't know what to say. For example, and especially when there's pain, confusion, complexity. Sometimes I don't have the words. We don't have the words. The words don't seem to fit. I'm sure we all recognize experiences of this now or at other times. And in these moments, we can turn to silence. Silence is something that is always available to us as a resource, as we could say, a mikveh, right? Something we can, immerse in at a moment's notice. It's importantly different what I'm offering today than being silenced, which is when we do have the words and they're squashed. That's not what I'm talking about. The silence that I want to invite you into is a welcoming one. It's the silence of relief. You feel the relief of not having to put it into words. What is more than I can explain right now? When we try to language something, give language to something, we have to put one word in front of the other. We can only go one at a time. But in silence, there's room for everything at the same time, in all directions, which might be despair and grief and the possibility of comfort, of hope, much more besides. We don't have to choose between this or that. This kind of silence has a straightforwardness and simplicity to it. It leaves everything as it is. It lets everything speak for itself, be what it is without having to be known or understood. Of course, knowing and understanding can be really important in time, but often we'll all meet this many, many times in the course of certainly our lives, but most likely a week, a day, a month. Often we're just not there yet. We're not yet able to see the whole picture, make sense of it all. And in the meantime, what's here for us in the meantime is silence. Our Jewish tradition offers so much wisdom around silence. But in the spirit of silence, I am not going to do more now than just to say that it is here and in abundance. And maybe in the Q&A, there'll be time to unpack that a bit more. But for now, I want to invite you into practice. So let's find a supportive posture. Totally up to you what that might be. Just adjusting the body, finding some stability and dignity and softness in the way that you arrange yourself. And let's be quiet together. There are any number of practices that you could turn to in the silence. Most simply, you could find a relatively stable and not unpleasant aspect of your experience, such as the breath or the sensations in your hands, and rest attention here, silently observing and allowing and returning each time you wander. And there is always the option of doing even less than that, not even having to choose a practice or formulate an intention, not having to do anything within, staying just right where you are and wordlessly sitting in the space quietly together. Hmm. And when something challenging arises here and now, you don't have to turn to it. It doesn't have to be a task. You can just leave it where it is and stay where you are. Or you might choose willingly and freely to turn towards it, to notice it in the body and to soften with it as best you can, to open to the possibility that at least some part of the difficulty is part of our shared humanity. That every single one of us meets difficulty up close and personally, time and again. So if there's difficulty arising, maybe it's not all about you, not your fault. Maybe it's just how it is. Maybe we can offer compassion to what's challenging within. Sweetheart, this is hard. We might say, I'm right here with you. I'm not going anywhere. We might say, may you be well, to our own difficulties as they arise. May you be well in the midst of this. May you meet what is painful with spaciousness and love. Knowing if you choose to practice in this way, that at any point, at a moment's notice, we can leave everything where it is and drop back into the mikveh of silence within. The mikveh of silence within. Right away, just like that. There is a kind of okayness which actually doesn't depend on what is happening inside you or around you. It is an ultimate dimension of peace which is entirely imperturbable. Sometimes in the silence, we begin to glimpse, move towards, recognize, even relax into this transcendent okayness, stillness, peace. And how about noticing that this is a shared silence? We are together right now. Many others are here practicing with you, holding the space open for you to rest into. We're all doing it for each other. How might it be to allow yourself and whatever you may be feeling here and now, all of it to belong to this shared space and silence? as we come into the last few minutes, maybe you'll hear the wordless melody of this nigun emerging from the silence, from the great silence within all things, all moments, all souls. Thank you for your practice, your silence.
Thank you so much, Zac. Friends, we ask that you please stay present for another minute or two as we offer an opportunity for those who are mourning or observing yurt site, or for whom it's their custom to join in the mourner's Kaddish to recite it. Thanks to Harry for sharing the words on the screen. If you'd like to put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat, you're welcome to do that now or after we recite Kaddish. And if you are doing so, please join me by rising in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitgadal, Bikadash, Shemei Rabba, Yamad Ra, He V'Yamich Malchukei, B'chayeichon, Yamichon, B'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, B'tamiid, B'imru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Barach, Le'olam Amei Amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'al v'yitmam v'yaseh Adar v'yidalel v'al shemei tekudasha La'ila min kol birchata v'shirata v'shbechata v'nechemata v'hamiran ba'alma Yehi shlama rabba b'Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yachol Shalom Aseh Shalom Aleinu v'Yamach Yisrael v'Yakol Yoshvei Tevel Imru Amen.
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 Friends, thank you so much for joining us as always today. And if you're leaving us now, hope you'll join us tomorrow. We'll sit into Shabbat at the end of this challenging week. Sit into Shabbat. with Yael Shai at our usual time, 12:30 Eastern. So please join us then if you can. And of course, you're invited to stay on to continue to use this time, space, this community as a container for your own practice. If you like, you can turn the sound up on your computer, just continue to sit with that beautiful guidance that Zac offered, or join us for a conversation about the teaching and practice today in the chat. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can put it in the chat. Just preface it by writing question all in caps, and I will try to keep an eye out for that. And okay, Zac, let's bring you in. Here we go. Thank you so much. So, Zac, let's talk about silence. I had to laugh because I same thing happened at a staff meeting at IJS yesterday. We had a very long conversation about silence. Uh, Said many words about silence. Um, I really appreciated that focus today because it's exactly what I need. Um, that is exactly what I need is an honoring of silence. When in a, I wish we could find another word for challenging times because it's losing its potency, I think, as a word. But um, we'll stick with it. Challenging times. There's something about silence and honoring silence and lifting up silence that feels so reassuring to me. There's such an impulse to jump to words, to explanations, to even words of comfort, and uh, it's, I would relate it to Jewish practices around loss and grief, where when there is a loss and there is grief or a stress to the system, tradition is silence, is not to speak to the mourner, certainly not to speak to the mourner before the burial, and certainly not, and including not speaking to the mourner during the Shiva, unless the mourner initiates it. So, however, you said something which I think I took to understand as we can, even though I was making a joke, there is silence that we can reference within or beneath the words that are spoken. And that's what I experienced in the practice today. There was silence, there was speaking, but even as you were speaking and offering guidance for our practice, I was aware of silence, of that as an expression of silence, and also silence was present within it. So I want to invite you to, I don't know how you would respond to that, but how can we think about silence not as an absence of sound, but as a different quality that can be present even in the midst of noise and sound? That's the question at the end of that long wind up.
Mm, I appreciate it. Mm. Something firstly about the practice of being silent, being quiet in times of grief and with mourners. And one of the things that I find really powerful about this, as opposed to a more hurried, wordy attempt to comfort, is that I think it communicates a kind of trust and sufficiency that says, this is really hard. And there's this other dimension or bigger space or more sacred perspective that has space for this, that isn't so threatened by it that we have to quickly explain and wrap it
Mhm.
up and ward off what we're afraid of. There's some trust without even having to know exactly what that is or be able to explain it. Just that maybe it's all right to be quiet in this moment. So that
Mhm.
sense of sufficiency, of okayness that I think silence can communicate. another element of it for me, which can be, as you say, like within words, within any moment, is a kind of mystery that for me it's a mikveh. It's like it's a
Right.
balm that even when I do try and put things into words, which obviously I do a lot of the time, right? Like, and I get a lot of pleasure from, a lot of satisfaction and connection from. Even when I'm doing that, it helps me to recognize that the words are very beautiful but imperfect tools.
Mhm.
So even when I'm putting it into words, and even when I think, oh, I've really explained that, you know, it's still going to be at best an approximation. The
Mhm.
world is always richer and more diverse and subtler than our descriptions. And so, in that sense, even when I'm saying something, there's an element that's unsaid, right? There's an element that like spills over, eludes the grasp of my description. And so that's one sense in which we could say the silence is within everything. It's a kind of beyond, always more.
Yeah. It was so rich. I'm keeping an eye on the chat also while I'm listening to you. Couple of phrases you used which were really powerful. Um, the mikvah reference I thought was I think you, if you remember what you said, referred to as dropping into a mikvah of silence. Yeah. And
Mm,
then you also referred to, I think, basically the same thing as this space of okayness, right? Or it was like a just use that again of okayness. Um, Imperturbable was the word you used. That can't be perturbed, can't be stirred up. That is beyond whatever agitation we're feeling for whatever reason in the moment. Um, that when we use some of these words like silence, mikvah, um, uh, I think it seems to be referring to that, and also to the soul as pure, right? As the neshama Torah that can't be sullied, that can't be disturbed, that is untouched by. Um, Maybe you could say a little bit more about that, about how you experience this idea of dropping into, and there were all these wonderful terms that we can use that are probably we can parse the distinctions between them, but basically very similar about a pool of water, a mikveh, pure of living waters. Mayim Chaim is different. It's not just water in mikveh; it's living waters. It's waters that are part of the water cycle that we're immersing in, or the soul, which is untouched, or that light, or in mindfulness terms, sometimes maybe tell me if I'm off here, but when we think about expansive awareness, spacious awareness itself, which can hold all things, is a different kind of metaphor than that kind of pool metaphor. But it's that same place, a spacious okayness that can hold all the agitation in some way. Um,
mm,
is that um,
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a spiritual assertion, right? That everyone has to check out in their own experience. I imagine there are people who say, like, I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing, I don't know. I've never experienced that. Right? Um, I would say that I have, that there's something that says, like, oh, yes, there is a place of okayness, even in the midst of things being very much not okay. Right. Um, so what do you think about that? I mean, it's was one of these things we just, everyone has to kind of check it out in their own experience.
Mm, definitely. Definitely. Mm. So, the mikveh, one way I can explain my own relationship with this is that it feels possible to me to, at any moment, it's like my hands are like this, busy doing things and trying to explain. And at any moment, I can just go, ah. And it's like, it's moving from doing mode to being mode, right? From the 6 days of working to Shabbat,
Hmm.
just even instantaneously, just ah. And I just stop. And it's like, as I stop trying to make anything different.
Right.
I stop trying to understand. I stop trying to piece all the words and the jumble and mumble and swirl of thoughts in my mind. I stop trying to tidy it up. I just, And that moment feels like immersing. Feels like there's a kind of release in the silence, in the stopping,
Hmm.
that feels like coming back into a kind of mikvah. So that's like a momentary practice that
Hmm.
we can do to taste that the mikveh that I'm suggesting is available. And one thing I think is really important here is to honor and recognize that, when we do something like that, ah, especially when it's a relatively new practice, before too long, like maybe 1 second later, well, firstly, let me say that that 1 second is significant, right? That 1 second of is doing something and is very meaningful. But 1 second later, or 5 seconds later, or who knows, we'll start to feel the tug of the different things that are kind of calling for our attention and saying, you can't leave me alone. You need to sort me out. You need to figure out what you think about this, or what's going to happen about that, or what you're going to say to this person. And they sort of ache and gnaw and tug at us within. They say
Hmm.
it's not okay to stay where you are. You have to
Hmm.
do this. And maybe sometimes we do, right? There's important stuff
Right.
to do.
Right.
But I think that as we practice something like this, we practice just letting things be for a moment, letting things be unexplained or wordless. We're slowly, slowly teaching ourselves that it's okay to take that moment of Shabbat, that moment of silence. And so, exactly as you say, it's always available in that moment of release, but it is also a cultivation. It's also something that we can grow our familiarity and ease with, and that we can expect to
Right.
require that kind of training. Like, it's not just, and then I'll just stay there for as long as I want and
Right.
at some point choose to re enter. Um, the world gets tangled up in us and demands a lot of us. And we have to be quite firm sometimes in saying, nope, I'm not going there right now. Ah, there's a kind of fierceness, a gvura,
Right.
strength. I'm just
Right.
taking some space right now.
Right. I mean, I subscribe to everything you say, and I'm also aware there are two guys here talking, right? I'm also, and I'm thinking about one of the points that's made in the chat is um, about speaking, about the urge to speak and the necessity of speaking, and the right to speak, and that everything that you're saying or that's being said today does not contradict that in any way, shape, or form. This is really about whether our speech emerges from that mikvah of silence, that pause, that Shabbat, that non-reactive, less reactive place, I think. Um, and as you just said, it's about taking a moment, right, before the speech so that what is said will be different than it might otherwise be if it's purely reactive. And there isn't that space, there isn't that silence, there isn't that okayness. There's kind of a frantic quality to it. I don't know. What do you think
Mm,
about that? Before we close, we have a
I
couple of
think
minutes before we.
Amen. I haven't seen the chat, but it sounds like there's something really important there, and
Yeah.
I want to really underline the distinction between a silence that we individually are choosing for ourselves and being silenced, which is just a totally different thing and not the mikvah or the blessing, but that's oppression and marginalization, patriarchy, um, and we need to speak up against that.
Hmm.
So, this is a practice for each of us to choose for ourselves when to practice. And if somebody else is choosing it for us, then that's not the practice of sacred silence.
Right. Right. Zach, before we end, can I we just I want to throw something in because it's always been one of the most powerful teachings I've learned, which is I believe this might be Abraham Joshua Heschel's take on the tradition that at Mount Sinai there was total silence. Actually, it's a rabbinic midrash that there was total silence before the Ten Commandments were given, before there was revelation, and that divine words emerged out of revelation. He goes so far as to say um, that the whole Torah is a midrash on silence. All of Torah is a midrash on silence, which lest one thinks that, oh, this is just some weird, importation of Eastern traditions dressed up as Jewish. So authentically Jewish to have this concept that speech emerges out of silence, that sacred speech emerges out of silence, and that the two go together. Um, and that we're meant to be channels of that revelation. And so we need to be able to cultivate that stillness and silence that you helped us access today. So thank you as always so much. It was such a beautiful, beautiful practice. I see some nice words also about last night's meditation, by the way. And thanks, Harry, for mentioning that. That's on our YouTube channel, as this sit will be as well. So you can check that out if you missed last night. You're welcome to join us asynchronously. As always, thanks to you, Zac. Thanks, Harry. Thanks all of you for being here. Let's sit together into Shabbat with Yael Shai tomorrow at our usual time. Many blessings, everyone.